Hi, welcome back. I'm Varun Agarwal, Senior Editor at ETCIO, and I welcome you all to our video series on Unified Cloud Experience. Organizations have different IT environments, from on-premises to private cloud to multiple public clouds bought over time to support the business requirements, thus creating a hybrid multi-cloud environment. It is a challenge for CIOs and CTOs to ensure that the hybrid multi-cloud pieces, such as on-premise workloads, cloud, network, and security, work together cohesively to achieve the true promise of cloud, which is agility, scalability, security, automation, and cost-efficient operations. More often than not, these challenges arise as a result of organizations getting into the execution mode when adopting cloud and taking isolated decisions without mapping interdependencies and integrations required across infrastructure workloads and data sources. So, to talk about this extremely complex topic, we have with us Rajesh Awasthi, who is an industry veteran and the head of cloud and MHS at Tata Communications. He's been in the IT industry for over 25 years. So, welcome to ETCIO, Rajesh.
Thank you, Varun. Thank you, ETCIO, for giving me this opportunity. Look forward to this.
So, Rajesh, cloud has not only been able to drive technology innovation, but now is actually acting as a driver for business imperatives globally, right? So, how do you really see cloud evolving during these unprecedented times in India, especially? And what specific trends do you see influencing this adoption?
So, when the pandemic struck the world and India, I think one of the most important things which was there for most of the customers was to make sure that their businesses run as usual. So for them, the choice was to either run their own operations, which was becoming difficult. So they started looking at whether they can have solution which could help them work from home or their employees working from home. So one of the foremost things which most of the customers looked at when they were looking at cloud service providers like Tata Communications or our partners like AWS, Azure or Google was to see if there is a virtual desktop environment where they could help their employees to work from home using their personal laptops or desktops and get into the corporate networks and access applications on that corporate networks. So that was something which was enabled by the cloud service providers. I think that was the first thing which was done. But as this lingered on, we saw most of the businesses had to look at digital way of working, and they had to enable their processes as well as business applications to support. And that's when they started looking at cloud as a via media to make their operations and processes digital. And that was something which was enabled by partners like Tata Communications when customers were looking at that. And that is something which paved way for larger adoption of cloud services during this pandemic times. And that is something which some of the organizations who were early adopters in this particular case benefited out of it. And we saw huge uptake of cloud services during this period.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen unprecedented adoption of cloud. But actually, one of the things that we've seen is when people start adopting it, they end up getting confused between cloud implementation plan with cloud strategy. Now, could you just demystify what the two actually mean and why it is important to have both actually defined quite cohesively?
Yeah, Varun, that's a very good question because that's where we've seen some of the organization. I'm not saying all. A lot of CIOs already had their cloud strategy defined, or in case they didn't have, they were looking at something which would help them. I think the cloud strategy begins with what business improvement or business impact that the organization wants to bring in. And whether agility of cloud, flexibility of cloud, and the scalability of cloud enables that in a secure manner becomes an imperative. And that's something which defines the cloud strategy. Whereas cloud implementation is a way to implement the strategy that you have defined. So I would say the end result of cloud strategy and cloud implementation is different. In cloud strategy, you look at what is the business impact this strategy will bring in. Cloud implementation is a way to implement the strategy that you have defined, which would have an impact on the business. And that's where I would say the difference comes in. So it starts from business and comes down to implementation. Whereas we've seen some of the people thinking, what I implement becomes my cloud strategy. No, that's not how it works. In a very short and a simple form, that's the difference between cloud strategy and cloud implementation.
I think that's an interesting thing because lately we've seen IT heads or CIOs really becoming business partners, and it's not just about just getting IT configurations done. And this really signifies how important that role becomes today. Now, one of the things is in cloud is about modernization. So application modernization becomes an important play. Why do you think organizations really look into application modernization when they're actually looking at connected cloud ecosystem?
So we have to look back on the history side, how application architectures have evolved. We've seen application architectures which were monolithic. That's when people used to deploy those applications on mainframe systems or similar systems which were available in those times. Then we saw people moving towards a client-server architecture of application, where they had a 2-tier or a 3-tier application. That means you had a web interface, you had web access, you had app, and then you had databases. That was the second architecture, and that's something which has been meeting the purpose of most of the organizations. But now we are moving ahead towards a connected world. And when we are saying connected world, people don't want to have these kind of N-tier architecture deployed. And that's where they're looking at an application architecture which should be micro segmented. That means you look at what is the function that you want to achieve, and you create an application associated with that. But in order to get that, you also need to have the infrastructure supporting that environment. And that's where some of the cloud native platforms come into picture, where earlier people used to talk about virtualized machines, or VMs as they were called. When people started looking at a micro segmented application or a micro architecture application, in that scenario, they had to have a system which was to support those smaller application modules, which were self-contained and deployed on a container. That means you had the application image, you had the libraries required for associated application module to work on a container, as well as the OS image integrated into one, deployed in smaller containers. And you manage that through Kubernetes. And that's something which was used by some of the customers to get their application onboarded on a cloud native platform like containers. What benefits customers get, and I'll possibly give an example of an e-commerce industry.
Sure.
You must have seen a lot of billion-dollar sales or electronic sales coming in. When electronic sales come in, what you need is on the e-commerce portal, the electronics application module or module which is managing the electronic e-commerce should be scalable enough to meet the requirement, which is going to be unprecedented. Whereas you may not need the other areas, because more and more customers would go to buy electronics item at that point in time. So that means you have infrastructure which is very agile in nature. So depending on the utilization, you define which application module or which service needs to be scaled up. You scale that up automatically as the usage is increasing on that. And the cloud infrastructure should support that. And that's what containers are all about. They support such cloud native platform. A lot of time in technical terms, people call function as a service, which is nothing but what I spoke. Function is that it should support application modules, which is supporting that e-commerce side for electronic sale. That is the function that you want to scale drastically in comparison to the other module. And that's what is called as cloud native platform. This would enable agility and also make organizations nimble and utilizing their assets more what they were utilizing in a virtualized environment. And that's what is delivered as part of the cloud native platforms like containers. That is a service which we also deliver. We call it as ISO Kubernetes services, which is a container platform orchestrated and managed through Kubernetes on our own cloud environment, which is called as ISO Private Cloud. And that's what we deliver to enable such functionality for us.
Right. So, we talked about the application part of the cloud ecosystem, but when we talk about unified cloud strategy, we also talk about integrating network, the entire network, security, data, compliance strategies, etc., while moving to the cloud. Now, can you talk a bit about why this whole integrated strategy is really important, and why do we really need unified cloud strategy?
And this is something which is very interesting, because Gartner did a study where they found out that 70% of the enterprise organizations, be it large enterprise or mid-market organizations, are going to use multi-cloud environment. That means they would have more than one cloud environment to enable their workloads or applications which they want. And that is true for most of the SME customers also. You may not be using infrastructure services in a multi-cloud environment, but you would still have multi-cloud environment, because you may be using, let's say, an HR application X SaaS vendor, and maybe your finance application being used from a Y application SaaS vendor. Whereas if you talk about a large enterprise or mid-market, they may be taking infrastructure services from various cloud providers like Tata Communications delivering ISO Private Cloud, or looking at a public cloud environments like AWS, Azure, or Google, depending on the workload that you want. So when you're talking of such a diverse virtual data center, which is going to be spanning across these environments, what is important is how these cloud environments are going to be interconnected, because any application that you may have does not run in isolation. They don't run like islands. They always talk to the other applications. That means you need to have an interconnected cloud. And that's where, as Tata Communications, we deliver some of the network services. We have something called as ISO Private Connect, which connects the public cloud services like AWS, Azure, Google, or Oracle, or even some of the SaaS providers with, let's say, ISO Private Cloud environment, which is running on our cloud, or it could be even on-premise data center, which customer may have. So you are creating a connected cloud. But still, a challenge which customers have is, how do you assure that you are securing this environment across these environments that you have? That is one concern. Second, whatever policies they want to define as an IT on the infrastructure, how do you seamlessly define that over any of these environments? And one of the basic thing is, how do you monitor and manage all these environments? Because the skill sets may be required, may be very different on one platform to the other. And that's where what is important is you get a partner enables a unified management across these environments. When I'm saying management, it incorporates the infrastructure monitoring, it incorporates the infrastructure orchestration on any of the cloud environments. It includes the security policy definition and guardrails around those on these environments. And that's something which is delivered in a unified cloud management portal. From Tata Communications perspective, we have created that portal. We call it as a portal which is TCX portal from Tata Communications. That interfaces with all services that Tata Communications provides, be it our network services, be it our transformation network services, be it our unified communication collaboration services, or managed security services, or cloud and hosting services. Within cloud and hosting services, if you are looking at a single orchestration platform, we deliver it through something called as ISO Cloud Command, which is a unified management portal across these environments. It has integration with our ISO Private Cloud. It has API level integration with AWS, Azure, and Google, and we are also looking at integrating it with Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Thus, giving a customer a platform which can be used to monitor, manage, as well as secure this varied multi-cloud environment. And they need not worry about skill sets on these different clouds. That is something which is enabled by such platform. And this is something which is becoming very important for our customers.
Thank you so much, Rajesh, for that perspective. I'm sure these would be the starting points for some of the people who are trying to build a unified cloud experience, and I'm sure it'll be helpful for everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today.